I'm your bedtime historian. Strange, isn't it, that an empire famed for its marble roads and iron discipline once trembled at rumors of painted islanders who counted their armies in spirits and fog. A wind-whipped shore, the hiss of unfamiliar tides, and 40,000 Roman sandals pressing into damp sand where no legionary had marched before. You wonder how it felt salt-crusting armor, distant gulls calling warnings, shadows of druids whispering omens behind the mist. Did they see ghosts between the reeds, or just the glint of waiting spears? Why did they believe the land itself was watching? If you enjoy drifting through ancient fears and half-remembered conquests, tap like and subscribe. I promise these footsteps in the dark will keep echoing. And tell me, have you ever stood somewhere so old you swore the ground could speak back? Now dim the lanterns and step with me into the hush before the first Roman horn sounded over Britain. You follow the rhythm of those boots up the beach. There's no clash, yet only breath and rumor. Rome had stretched its fingers across continents, tasting heat in Egypt and cold stone in Gaul. But here the mists rose higher than any imperial banner. They said Britain was a place of spirits, a half-finished edge of the world, where sun barely rose and every tree might watch you back. The men at the front, leather-strapped, spear-tipped, iron-helmed, carried more than weapons. Each one brought a rumor from home. One legionary muttered that druids could summon storms with a word. Another that Briton warriors wore only blue dye and the prayers of their mothers. Some whispered that the locals were so numerous they could stand in ranks from sea to sea, an ocean of flesh ready to swallow Rome whole. There's no scholarly consensus on how these fears bloomed. Some historians suspect soldiers spun tales to mask their own dread. Others argue the generals themselves fueled the myths. Bigger enemies meant bigger glory when conquered. So here they stand, an army small by the standards of empire, yet mighty by the measure of belief. Behind them, ships rock, gently carrying crates of wine-salted fish oil lamps and papyrus orders. Ahead, forests rustle with unseen eyes. The sand shifts under bronze-shod feet, each step a quiet promise they would build roads, carve forts, erect stones to say Rome was here. A curious detail, it said, the first standard to touch British soil bore the eagle, a symbol so sacred that losing it meant disgrace deeper than death. One young standard-bearer tucked a pebble from that shore into his boot, hoping to carry Britain back to the Seven Hills when he returned. If he returned. Imagine the hush at dawn, rows upon rows, breath fogging the morning air. Orders in Latin cut through the cries of gulls. Some men looked inland and saw nothing but shadowed trees and rumors of wild chariots. Some stared at the sea behind them, half wishing for storms to drag their ships away before the first spear was thrown. And yet they stayed. Rome always stayed. A legion's true strength was not in its swords, but in its stubborn heartbeat, step by step, road by road, rumor by rumor, until myth bent beneath iron discipline. Tonight, in this hush of your mind, you stand among them. Feel the weight of the helmet pressing your brow. Taste the salt wind on your lips. Hear the distant murmur of druids promising storms the Romans can't read on any map. Sleep walks you backward through time, 40,000 souls at your shoulder, staring into mists that would become a story, told by candlelight centuries later. A landing, a rumor, a footprint pressed into an island's memory. The shore fades behind you as the hush of that first landing gives way to something louder, numbers, whispered like spells around every campfire. Some say the Britons numbered 2 million, 2 million warriors swirling in painted lines through forests and moors, too many to count, too wild to tame. It's dawn again, a thin gray light settling on damp tents and restless horses. You wander among the legionaries, catching snippets of their breathless counting. 40,000 men, a river of shields and sandals. And out there, some swear, an ocean of Britons who could drown Rome in a single charge. The rumor alone weighs more than any iron gladius. But how did these numbers swell so large? There's no scholarly consensus on who first claimed 2 million. Some believe it began with Roman scribes eager to inflate the odds, magnifying Caesar's victories into something worth inscribing on marble walls. Others argue the Britons themselves may have whispered the numbers to make the invaders second-guess every forward step. A war of statistics before a single javelin flew. By the flicker of oil lamps, commanders argue over reports. Scouts return with wild tales. Tribes merging, splitting, regrouping under unseen chieftains. One scout insists he saw a line of warriors stretching across a ridge like ants on a burial mound. He counts them twice for good measure, then adds another 1,000 for the shadows he couldn't see. Who's to say what's true? Yet the men believe. Numbers have a strange power when you're cold and far from home. They grow in the mind, multiplying in the dark. A single war cry echoes like 1,000 voices. A distant bonfire flickers into a signal of legions gathering behind the hills. A curious footnote, some tablets suggest that Roman paymasters used these rumored headcounts to argue for more coin from the Senate. After all, if you're facing 1 million rebels, you deserve better wine, heavier armor, perhaps even a bonus for your widow, should you vanish into the mist. By day, the soldiers drill shields, lock tight spears bristling like iron hedgehogs. By night, they measure the space between their fires and the dark tree line where they swear they hear drums. You stand among them listening. A branch cracks somewhere unseen, and your heartbeat counts faster than any census ever could. Historians still argue whether any real tally ever approached those wild figures. Some say Britain's total population barely brushed 2 million in the whole Iron Age, men, women, children, huddled in roundhouses tending pigs and thatched fields. But when fear travels faster than fact, even the smallest tribe becomes an army of ghosts. Picture it, a legionary named Marcus, scratching lines in the dirt, comparing 40,000 to 2 million. Each grain of sand, a Briton warrior. Each star above another, painted face in the fog. He wonders if the numbers will swallow him before the enemy's spear does. Still, the tents stand. The standard flickers in the wind. Rome's strength lies not just in iron, but in paperwork rolls, of named supply lists, tallies of rations down to the last loaf of stale bread. They count everything, bodies, barrels, hours left before dawn. And yet they can't count what waits in the woods. Some commanders dismiss the talk. Barbarians, they sneer, can't organize an army that size. Others glance at the mist and decide to double the night watch anyway, just in case 1 million shadows choose to walk out of the forest. In the hush before sleep, you feel the weight of these numbers pressing into your mind. 40,000 hearts beating in practiced rhythm and beyond the rumor of countless others. It's an ancient equation written on cold ground steel versus story shields versus shadows, arithmetic versus myth. As you drift deeper into this restless camp, listen for the uncounted, the hidden warriors who might never appear in any Roman ledger, yet shape every footstep through these foreign fields. Numbers don't just measure armies. They feed dreams, stoke fears, and twist history until fact and fantasy sleep side by side. Dawn slips away, and in its place comes parchment ink, and the quiet scratching of a Roman general's stylus. This is where you glimpse Caesar's chronicles. In brittle scrolls and fading lines, the words of the conqueror himself drift through centuries to whisper in your ear tonight. Julius Caesar wrote with all the certainty of a man who knew his audience was far away back in marble villas under the sun, hungry for stories of monsters conquered and lands tamed by Roman will alone. So when he described Britain, he painted a place thick with mist and mystery, peopled by tribes too many to count, too wild to be believed. You stand beside his makeshift desk, a plank balanced over barrels, lanterns swinging in the breeze. The general leans in, squinting at the ink, deciding whether 10,000 or 30,000 sounds more impressive to the senators back home. Some scholars remain puzzled by the gaps between Caesar's words and the battlefield remains we've found since. Were there really rivers of painted warriors, or just scattered bands defending sacred groves? One line from his commentariae still drifts down the ages. Britannia est insula incognita. Britain is the unknown island. A single phrase carved into history, yet behind it sprawls pages of precise exaggeration. For Caesar, the truth bent easily under the weight of Roman ambition. Picture him shoulder-draped in wool scribes at his side dictating victories before the battles even ended. He knew that fear back in Rome meant loyalty. If the people believed he faced endless hordes, then every coin he demanded for more legions would ring true. It's curious how these chronicles, so carefully crafted, turned rumor into record. A scratch of ink declared 2 million Britons, where there might have been thousands. One scribe's flourish turned a skirmish at a riverbank into an epic stand against an entire nation. And once written, who would question it? By the flicker of a dying fire, a foot soldier listens to a recited passage. He shifts on cold ground, hearing his name folded into a legion counted among heroes who faced impossible odds. A tiny comfort for a man so far from his mother's bread and the warm stones of a Roman street. There is no scholarly consensus on how many men truly clashed when Caesar crossed the Channel. Archaeologists find spearheads and bits of pottery ash pits and defensive ditches, but these cannot count the living. They cannot measure the thunder in a soldier's chest as a druid's chant rose beyond the trees. You drift closer, peering over Caesar's shoulder. He dips his stylus again, the quill scratching tales of painted chariots and shrieking warriors who made grown men drop shields and prayers all at once. A grain of truth beneath layers of theater history dressed up for Senate applause. And yet, within the showmanship, something real beats. These chronicles bind Rome to Britain forever parchment more enduring than swords. Every schoolchild centuries later would read those lines imagining blue-painted giants crashing into iron ranks. The ink outlived the men who bled on those shores. A curious detail, some fragments suggest Caesar brought British war captives back to Rome, paraded through streets lined with curious eyes and jeering crowds. Living proof that he had faced an uncountable tide and tamed it. Proof that the empire's reach had stretched one coastline further into the dark. Some researchers continue to debate whether Caesar truly feared Britain or simply needed a new canvas for his legend. After all, an unknown island offered endless space for triumphs and the occasional convenient lie. In the hush of your mind, picture that general, now his eyes, sharp lips, curling into the faintest smile as he adds another zero to an enemy's numbers. His stylus hovers. 2 million. 2 million reasons for Rome to fear him, to pay him, to remember him. Beside him, the Channel waves lap the hulls of Roman ships. Beyond the parchment's edge, Fires flicker in British hills. 1,000 warriors, 10,000, 2,000,000. It hardly matters now. The ink says what the legionaries must believe, what the Senate must fund, what history must one day dream. And tonight so must you. Slip deeper into the fog now away from Caesar's ink and into the living web of Britain's tribes. Here numbers blur into blood ties, rivalries, and pacts struck under sacred oaks. This is where you meet the fierce Briton alliances, messy shifting, bound together by promises that could splinter overnight. Imagine it, a circle of chieftains around a smoking hearth. The air smells of peat and sweat iron blades resting across knees. No single king commands them all. Each tribe guards its own pride, its own patch of bracken and stone. Yet when Roman sails appear on the horizon, even the bitterest rivals must decide whether to stand together or sell each other out for scraps of favor. A curious detail, some ancient accounts speak of warriors daubed not only in woad blue, but also in crushed copper and charcoal, each clan marking skin with secret signs to claim kin or bluff the enemy. From afar, Romans saw only a painted horde. Up close, every swirl of dye told a story of old grudges and fragile bonds. Historians still argue whether these alliances were strong enough to pose a true threat. Some suggest the Britons were too fractured forever bickering over cattle raids and boundary stones. Others believe that for fleeting moments, under a powerful druid's blessing or a charismatic queen, they forged coalitions strong enough to make Roman officers shiver behind their shields. By firelight, envoys pass horn cups of mead murmuring promises. A neighboring tribe might pledge 50 chariots, rough-painted wood, and snarling ponies trained to wheel and slash through enemy ranks. Another might send sons to fight in a cousin's quarrel, hoping to settle old debts in the chaos of Roman advance. But in the same breath, they whisper secret deals to Rome, tribute offered hostages traded paths, revealed through bogs no foreign boot should find. You drift among them, now crouch beside a warrior, sharpening a bronze blade with a stone, worn smooth by generations. He does not know how many men the Romans truly bring, 40,000 or 400, but he believes what the Druids say, that the land will rise to swallow iron, that spirits ride the night wind, that betrayal and loyalty are two sides of the same coin tossed on sacred ground. One chieftain boasts that his warriors stand 2,000 strong. Another scoffs 2,000. He claims 5,000 plus the spirits of ancestors at his shoulder. No scribe records these boasts, but they ripple through Roman camps, swelling that phantom army to impossible millions. Among these tribes, a deal struck at dusk might crumble by dawn. A cousin insults a cousin, a horse is stolen, an omen is read wrong by a trembling druid. Swords that pointed outward yesterday swing inward today. Rome counted on this divide and conquer bribes wrapped in silk daggers hidden behind friendly trade. There is no scholarly consensus on how deeply Roman gold greased these shifting packs. Some think whole clans turned coat for the promise of wine and warm cloaks. Others argue the tribes merely played the invaders like a fiddle, trading silence for supplies, betrayal for time, waiting for the right moment to vanish into the woods and strike from shadow. Picture the hush before dawn, a council fire guttering low. Young warriors doze with heads on shields, still dreaming of chariots clattering over Roman lines. An elder mutters prayers to trees older than any empire, asking which brother might turn traitor next. You stand there too, feeling the fragile heartbeat of these alliances, strong enough to terrify scouts in the mist, brittle enough to snap when the silver coins clink in the right palm. a league of painted warriors who might gather like a storm or scatter like startled crows at the first clash of metal on metal. The Romans knew this. They wrote letters home describing the Britons as both savage and cunning, disorganized, yet deadly when angered. Tales that fed Senate gossip and justified every fresh legion packed into ships bound for this cold edge of the world. Tonight you slip from council circle to council circle, eavesdropping on broken promises, oaths, sworn and shattered friendships forged under moonlight, only to vanish at dawn. This is the true shape of Britain's vast army, not just numbers, but a tapestry of rivalries and reconciliations forever shifting in the fog. Push through the hush of those smoky tribal fires and find yourself where iron meets wood, where Roman weapons and Briton wits collide in the open fields and narrow forest paths. Here you stand at the crossroads of weapons and wits, the cold steel edge of the empire facing the wild charge of warriors on chariots that squeal through bracken and bog. Picture a Roman legionary first laying eyes on a Briton chariot. Two small ponies snort steam into the cold air flanks, painted with swirling marks, hooves flicking up clumps of sodden earth. The charioteer rides bare-legged blue-dye, staining skin, a shrill call on his lips that sets his horses spinning like dancers in a storm. Some scholars remain puzzled by how effective these wooden chariots really were. Ancient Roman writers claim they were terrifying drivers, wheeling in fast hurling spears, leaping off to fight hand-to-hand before vanishing into the trees. But modern historians wonder if those tales were part real, part bravado chariots, more for show and intimidation than true battlefield supremacy. On the Roman side, discipline. Rows of shields interlocked so tightly you'd swear they breathed together. Gladdy, short-stabbing swords, so practical they become an extension of the soldier's arm. Spears bristling like iron hedgehogs when the charge comes. Helmets polished just enough to catch the enemy's reflection, so every Briton rushing forward might see his own fear staring back. A curious detail the Romans sometimes used: cowl traps, tiny iron spikes scattered to maim enemy horses and slow down a chariot's wheel. Small tricks to dull the thrill of that wild circling dance. The Britons in turn countered with cunning. They knew every hidden dip and ridge in the landscape. They guided Roman patrols into boggy traps, then struck from behind with slashing blades and shouted taunts. You stand amid the clash now. Hooves thunder past your ear, a wheel splashes through a puddle, a Roman centurion shouts orders above the din. Behind the clamor, another sound hums strategy, not just brute force, but a quiet game of wits under the noise of war. There is no scholarly consensus on which side held the true advantage. Some argue Roman engineering roads, siege weapons, iron discipline overwhelmed the Britons' shock tactics in the long run. Others insist the island's shifting terrain and clever ambushes cost Rome dearly, buying the tribes time to regroup, merge, betray, and strike again. By a rain-slick hill, a lone Briton crouches behind a boulder, watching the iron tide below. He grips a curved blade, chipped from too many clashes, breathes a prayer to gods the Romans can't name, and waits for a signal. A torch flicker, a distant horn, the rumble of wheels that tells him when to strike and vanish into the mist again. Meanwhile, in the Roman camp, engineers lay planks over marshes, drain wet fields, build palisades overnight. They test their Scorpios and ballistae, hurling bolts through straw dummies that stand in for the painted charioteers. They adapt. They always adapt, tightening lines, adjusting formations, learning to counter wild charges with calm walls of iron. A legion's strength lies in its memory. One ambush becomes a lesson scribbled into the next commander's notes. A failed maneuver is filed away with grain rations and spear tallies repurposed for the next clash under gray British skies. You drift among the warriors, now Roman shields rattling as they brace for another rush. Briton charioteers calling out in languages that echo off the wet hills. Each side tests the other iron versus wood drill versus surprise, the grinding weight of empire against the whip-crack twist of homegrown cunning. Somewhere in the swirl of mud and hoofbeats, a forgotten truth flickers. Battles aren't always won by sharper blades, but by the quiet thought behind them. The unspoken knowledge of a hidden path, a trapped wheel, rut a spear, thrust low when the enemy expects high. So here, in the hush of your drifting thoughts, you ride alongside both your fingers, brushing iron rivets one moment, gripping rough chariot rails the next. Listen to the clash, the whinny, the sharp Roman bark of orders, answered by wild yells in ancient tongues. It's not just weapons that win these fields, it's wits traded blow for blow in the fog, then retold as legends around fires that never truly die. Slip deeper into the hush, where the clang of iron fades, replaced by the low, creeping swirl of mist that blankets the land, the fog of war. Here, the ground itself chooses sides, tricking both painted warriors and armored legions. You stand at the edge of a battlefield that isn't just earth and grass, but a shifting stage where visibility blurs and courage is tested in whispers. Picture dawn again, thin light dripping like pale honey through a veil of drifting fog. A Roman scout rides ahead, eyes straining to pierce the white shroud. He sees nothing, then everything at once, the sudden shapes of trees, the flicker of a distant torch, the ghostly movement that might be an enemy, or just his own breath, made visible in the cold. Some scholars remain puzzled by how much the terrain shaped Rome's slow crawl across Britain. In fair weather and clear plains, legion discipline reigned supreme rectangles of shields rolling forward like iron tides. But in these mists, the locals held the true advantage. Forest paths split into hidden forks. Marshes swallowed heavy boots. Even the famed Roman roads turned to narrow traps when the fog thickened and made brothers indistinguishable from foes. A curious detail, some Briton chieftains timed attacks for dawn or dusk when fog rose thickest from the rivers, and the Roman standard-bearers could barely see the gilded eagles they were sworn to protect. One legend tells of a whole cohort led in circles until exhaustion made them easy prey for chariots bursting through the white curtain. Yet Rome, stubborn as stone, adapted. Engineers mapped high ground, built watchtowers, cut swathes through dense woods to deny ambushers their veil. Patrols went out in pairs, then in threes, shields locked even when no enemy could be seen. Messengers carried coded whistles to guide lost units back through the gray. Still, the mist found ways to hide the island's secrets. You walk with the soldiers now, boots squelching through wet ground, ears twitching at the snap of twigs. The fog deadens sound, yet amplifies fear. Was that a war horn? Or just wind, hissing through branches? Historians still argue whether more Romans fell to ambushes than open battles here. Some say the terrain cost more lives than any spear. Others point to accounts of Roman discipline, holding firm lines formed blindly, shields raised against unseen darts, orders barked into the gray until the enemy faded once more into bog and bracken. Amid this haze, a small band of Britons crouches low. They smear mud on arms to blend with the earth. Listen for the rhythmic clink of Roman armor. A quick rush, a shout, a single volley of stones or javelins then silence again. The fog closes over footprints, like water over a stone, wounds left behind, to bleed into the ground. In these fields, rumors took shape faster than armies. A missing patrol might spark tales of thousands waiting just beyond the next bend. An unseen horn blast might double in size by the time it reached the general's tent, carried by frightened whispers. Picture a centurion staring into the drifting gray, counting the shadows that might not exist. He murmurs to his men, "Hold the line, hold the line." And they do, teeth clenched against chattering, trusting that the fog will lift before the next rush. A curious footnote: some Roman scribes wrote of ghost battles, clashes they claimed happened, but left no bodies when the mist dissolved. Scholars debate if these were lies, illusions, or simply the mind's trick under too many sleepless nights and too few warm fires. You stand there now, drifting between lines you can barely see. On one side, the iron discipline of an empire refusing to yield to shadows. On the other, the sly grins of warriors who know every hollow and hidden path beneath the mist. Here, the land chooses its victors for the night. And when the sun finally burns through it, reveals only footprints, torn banners snagged on brambles, and men both conqueror and native left, guessing whether the enemy ever truly stood there at all. So let the fog settle in your thoughts tonight. Let it swirl around the edges of your mind, soft and heavy. The Romans learned that not every battle was won with swords. Sometimes it was the unseen, the half-guessed shapes, the fear that the earth itself might turn traitor. Those were the battles that left the deepest scars on the empire's pride. Step now from the misty edges into the heartbeat of the Roman camp itself, where every battle is decided long before sword meets shield. This is logistics versus legends. The quiet war waged with salted fish, counted grains, and careful maps, while rumors of 1,000,000 Britons howl just beyond the palisade walls. Imagine dusk in a Roman supply yard, rows of crates stacked like miniature forts within the larger wooden walls, barrels of wine and oil glistening in the torchlight, scribes muttering over wax tablets as they tick off supplies by lamplight. For every 10 soldiers, there are 10 more tasks: horses to shoe water, to haul bread, to bake hard enough to survive weeks on the march. Some scholars remain puzzled by how efficiently the Romans fed and armed an army so far from home. It wasn't the clash of steel alone that conquered Britain. It was the constant hum of supply lines stretching back to safer shores. Roads the Romans laid down overnight, mile by muddy mile, carried more than boots. They ferried barrels of salted pork, bushels of grain, amphorae of olive oil, and crates of dry wine that tasted faintly of seawater and empire. You drift among them, now passing a centurion, barking orders at a group of men, unloading sacks of lentils from a creaking cart. A curious detail: the Romans invented portable grain mills they carried on wagons, grinding flour right at the camp's edge. Bread rose from stone ovens, while rumors rose from campfires, stories of 2,000,000 painted warriors waiting just beyond the flickering torchlight. Inside one tent, a map lies unrolled on a crude table, pebbles marking out roads and river crossings. The general's finger traces a route this hill for an outpost, that bend in the river for a supply depot. Each grain sack delivered on time means another day the legion can stand its ground, iron discipline bolstered by stale bread and a ration of wine. Meanwhile, the Britons watch from the tree line. They know that swords break easily, but hunger breaks faster. Some slip through shadows to torch supply carts at night. Others steal horses, scatter cattle, or poisoned streams, small cuts to the lifeline that keeps Rome's iron heartbeat steady in this damp, stubborn land. Historians still argue which side truly mastered this hidden war. Some say Roman logistics were unstoppable engineers, building roads through marshes that turned into highways for conquest. Others point out how tribes used the land itself as a weapon, ambushing pack trains, leading supply convoys into bogs that swallowed wagons whole. You stand between the ledgers and the legends now. On parchment, every soldier has a ration, every horse an oat bag, every spear a replacement waiting in the next shipment. But around the fire, the numbers swell. 40,000 Romans become whispers of an empire that never runs dry. The Britons become countless shadows that strike where no supply clerk can list them. A curious footnote when a Roman soldier deserted it was often not the enemy's spear, but the rumor of a broken supply line that drove him off. Cold hunger, the slow dread of a camp running low on wine and bread. These turned brave men into shadows, slipping away into the night. In the hush of your drifting thoughts, follow a supply wagon bumping down a newly laid road. Its wheels creak like an old man's knees, iron-rimmed and steady. Each barrel it carries weighs more than the stories told of blue-painted warriors, yet together they prop up the very idea of Rome order in the face of wilderness discipline, in the teeth of rumor. At the same time, imagine a pair of Briton scouts hidden in the underbrush. They watch the cart pass, fingers brushing blades that might slit the oxen's harness, scatter the road with chaos. No charge, no chariot rush, just a quiet cut that echoes through the legion's belly days, later when the bread runs out sooner than planned. This is how legends live beside ledgers, each one feeding the other. For every wild tale of impossible numbers, there is an inventory sheet with careful tallies. For every torch-lit rumor, there is a dusty road carrying just enough wine to keep courage alive one more night. So as you drift deeper into sleep, remember, before any spear flew, before any sword gleamed in British mist, a road was built. A crate packed, a scribe hunched over a tablet, scratching out the only numbers that ever really won Rome its empire. How many, how much, and how soon before the next cart must roll. Drift now from the dusty roads of supply wagons into the darker corners of Britain's soul, into sacred groves, shadowed circles, and whispered chants where druids and propaganda took shape. This is not the clang of swords, but the quiet terror that seeps into an army's bones when priests and rumor work hand in hand. Picture a clearing deep within an ancient forest oak, branches twisting high above moss, hanging like old secrets. Here, a circle of figures in rough woolen cloaks gathers under moonlight. No iron helmets, no Roman standards, only the soft murmur of prayers that bind tribe to land, warrior to storm, story to fear. To the Romans, these druids were more than priests. They were the invisible backbone of Britain's defiance, keepers of lore, judges of betrayal, prophets who could summon winds and storms with a single chant, or so the legionaries believed. Some historians still argue whether druids wielded real power over weather and mines, or whether Roman generals simply painted them as sorcerers to justify brutal purges. A curious detail Julius Caesar himself wrote that the Druids practiced human sacrifice, binding prisoners to wicker cages and setting them aflame as offerings to gods older than Rome's marble temples. Modern scholars doubt these tales in full. Perhaps the truth was smaller stranger, a ritual here or there made monstrous by foreign eyes, who needed monsters to crush. You stand at the edge of that grove now hidden behind a fallen trunk slick with moss. You hear the low chant drifting through the mist, See a druid lift a curved blade, skyward moonlight, catching on iron not forged in Roman fire, but hammered on village anvils by hands that remembered older wars. Back in the Roman camp, the stories swell. Soldiers gather near fires, trading tales of druids who could curse whole legions with whispered words, who called wolves from forests, storms from empty skies. Fear is its own kind of spear. The more the druids became demons in Roman eyes, the easier it was for generals to justify burning groves, cutting down oaks, sacred to local clans, and painting themselves not as conquerors, but as righteous purifiers. There's no scholarly consensus on how much these stories fueled Rome's propaganda machine. Some scholars argue they turned an ordinary resistance into a cosmic battle between civilization and barbarism. Others believe the stories were half-true warnings, cautionary tales from trembling scouts who glimpsed fire dances beyond the tree line and carried panic back to camp. A curious footnote: in later centuries, Christian scribes rewrote many Druid tales, casting them deeper into shadow mystics, turned witches wise men, twisted into cult leaders whose forests had to be tamed by saints and kings. In this way, the Romans' fear bled forward through time, root to branch. Wander deeper into this hush. Picture a young Roman recruit, fresh from the warm sun of the Mediterranean, trembling in his damp tent, as a grizzled centurion leans close and whispers of druids. He imagines ghosts, dancing through fog knives, hidden under robes, chants that make strong men see visions and flee their posts. By dawn, every rustle in the bushes becomes a threat, every hoot of an owl a sign of a curse. Propaganda does not need marble inscriptions alone. It lives in these muttered campfire warnings, in the torchlit lectures from commanders who claim the enemy is not just men, but spirits given flesh. So the druids grow larger than life, a painted mask over real politics and petty raids. Yet beneath the fear, real power lingers. These priests keep the tribes stitched together when pride alone might break them apart. They bless chariots, settle feuds, predict omens that bind one chief to another. The Romans learned to fear the words as much as the spears. And so to kill the words, they hunted the wearers, grove by grove, stone by stone, until only stories remained. You stand in that clearing, now wind brushing your cheek like a ghostly finger. Beyond the trees, the Romans sharpened blades for tomorrow's skirmish. Here in the hush, a druid's chant slips through your mind like smoke. No iron can strike it, no road can carry it away. It lingers, binding land to memory, enemy to myth, rumor to fact, until no one can say where one ends and the other begins. So listen close. Sometimes power rides not on horseback or locked in iron, but whispered in the dark. And sometimes it's those whispers that outlive the empires that tried to silence them. Slip now from the hidden groves to the river's bend, where the hush of chants gives way to the clash and roar of shields. This is the Battle of the Thames, where rumors, alliances, and ghostly numbers finally crash headlong into iron discipline beside cold, muddy water. Picture the river, first sluggish and gray mist clinging to its banks like a secret. On one side, Roman tents flap in the wind, standard bearers adjusting their precious eagles. On the other, Briton warriors gather under banners painted with wolves' boars and swirling lines that flicker like living tattoos in the dawn light. The ground here is soft, churned by horse hooves, and somewhere underfoot, the past waits to be buried under bodies that neither side will count honestly. Some scholars remain puzzled by how decisive this clash really was. Roman scrolls claim it was a turning point, an outnumbered force holding firm against impossible odds. Briton oral tales drifting through centuries murmur, instead of a skirmish that slowed but did not break the island's wild heart. Perhaps both truths coil together, inseparable as river reeds. A curious detail: the Romans chose their ground well. The river at their flank prevented Briton chariots from circling behind, turning a battlefield into a funnel. Spears bristled outward like an iron thorn hedge, while shields locked together in practiced rectangles that deflected the swirling chaos of a tribal charge. You stand in that line now. Rain spatters your helmet. The man to your left smells of rust and fear. Ahead, the Britons roar down the slope, ponies, kicking up clods of earth charioteers, shouting oaths that promise Rome's iron will buckle like rotten wood. For a heartbeat, the line wavers. You feel the thud of hoofbeats reverberate through shield and bone. The first javelins arc overhead, some striking shields, with dull thunks, some vanishing into the river's churn. Yet the Romans stand, not because they're stronger, but because they are bound by drills drilled again and again. A centurion strides behind the front line, voice steady as he shouts reminders: hold brace, push back. Discipline is the empire's secret spear. There is no scholarly consensus on how many fell that day. Some ancient sources brag of thousands of Britons slain by disciplined Roman hands, but the bones scattered in river mud suggest smaller numbers, perhaps dozens, perhaps hundreds. Yet in the minds of those who survived, it felt like millions. Picture a charioteer who skids to a halt at the riverbank, trapped between water and iron. He leaps from the wicker cart, swings a blade that clangs harmlessly off a Roman scutum, then vanishes beneath a forest of stabbing spears. To the soldiers behind the shield wall, he is just one more phantom slain in a battle that proves Rome's staying power. A curious footnote: after this clash, the legionaries built a small earthwork fort near the river bend. Its ditches and ramparts still whisper in the soil centuries later, quiet proof that a few thousand men dug in, held firm, and left their mark in Britain's memory. By nightfall, the river runs thick with mud and rumor. Victorious officers scribble triumphs on wax tablets to be carried back across the channel, while foot soldiers swap stories that double the enemy's numbers with each telling. The chariots become an unstoppable flood, turned back by sheer willpower, an epic born from rain and blood that will earn promotions for generals and nightmares for survivors. Historians still argue whether this battle truly mattered in the grand sweep of conquest. Was it a final stand, or just one ripple in a stream that carried Roman boots ever deeper into Britain's damp heart? Some say the true victory lay not in the bodies left behind, but in the story carried home proof that Rome could face impossible odds and remain unbroken. You stand by the riverbank now, dusk closing over battered shields and broken carts. Somewhere downstream, the water carries away fragments of spear shafts, scraps of painted cloth, echoes of war cries that no one will hear again. Beyond the battle's noise, the land remains soft banks that will grow green come spring, hiding scars beneath layers of mud and mist. And as you listen to the fading clash, you understand sometimes rivers carry away more than blood. They carry legends, half-truths, and heroics, buried and reborn whenever someone asks how 40,000 Romans faced 2 million Britons and won. Follow the muddy current downstream, now past broken shields and drifting scraps of painted cloth, until the hush of water gives way to the furious echo of a queen's name, Boudicca's fury. If the Battle of the Thames showed Rome's iron, Boudicca's revolt would show how fragile that iron became when rage spread faster than any supply line. Picture her first, not as a queen on horseback, but as a mother, standing barefoot on scorched earth. Her home burned, her daughters harmed by Roman hands. Anger turned her hair into a banner, her voice into thunder rolling over Roman forts. Some scholars remain puzzled by how a single leader could unite so many scattered tribes under one name, one cause. But anger, real anger, has always been a better recruiter than gold or treaties. Her rebellion was more than a battle cry. It was a storm given shape by every whispered rumor that Rome could be broken if only enough warriors rose at once. They came in waves, farmers with scythes, nobles with bronze swords, charioteers who remembered their fathers' vows to keep Britain wild and unconquered. Some carried old wounds, others carried only hope that the Romans would run for their ships and never look back. A curious detail: Boudica is said to have driven her chariot through her ranks before each clash, her daughters beside her, their hair unbound, voices lifted in defiance. To Roman eyes, this was unthinkable, women leading warriors. To her people, it was prophecy made flesh. If the spirits of the land ever walked, they looked like Boudica wheels rattling over dirt roads Rome claimed but never truly owned. In the Roman camps, soldiers huddled closer to their standard poles. They remembered the painted chariots, the mist, the rumors of druids now. All these fears had a name and a roar behind it. Some deserted. Some begged their officers for thicker walls, sharper blades, more reinforcements from across the channel. Historians still argue whether her numbers really swelled into the hundreds of thousands. Roman scribes wrote of cities burned to embers, outposts overrun, and Roman citizens slaughtered in streets that had once seemed safe behind fort gates. Some say the figures were exaggerated propaganda to justify the brutal revenge that would follow. Others believe the ruin was very real, and the empire's fear more honest than any marble inscription admits. You stand among her warriors now, rough tunics, tangled hair shields, painted in the flickering glow of village fires. They gather near toppled Roman statues, laughing at the broken noses of emperors who had never stepped on this cold island. The air tastes of peat smoke fury, and a freedom so raw it almost chokes them. Boudica's rebellion forced Rome to look hard at its own numbers. Supply lines that had seemed unbreakable snapped under surprise attacks. Forts fell in days instead of weeks. Reports flew across the sea, pleas for legions to return, for more iron, for more coin, to buy loyalty in the face of roaring tribes. A curious footnote: when Rome finally crushed her revolt, they erased as much of her as they could from official records. Yet her name survived in the hush of stories mothers told children beside hearths for centuries. A ghost queen painted blue in memory, rattling her chariot wheels in the minds of every Roman governor who came after. Some researchers continue to debate where she fell, whether by poison, by Roman blade, or by her own hand, rather than surrender. The facts, like the forest paths she once rode through, twist and fade. What endures is the lesson she left behind, that fear of numbers, real or imagined, could shake an empire more deeply than any blade. Picture a Roman commander in the aftermath, standing in a ruined street that once echoed with Latin orders. He runs a thumb over scorch marks on a stone wall, counting the cost. He writes new orders for stronger forts, deeper ditches, stricter rules for the restless islanders who will never truly forget the queen who almost sent the empire running. And tonight, in the hush of your drifting thoughts, you ride beside her for a moment, hair lifted in cold wind wheels, spinning over Roman roads, that still remember the thunder of her fury. Even here, even now, her name rattles softly in the darkness, a reminder that no legion ever marches alone. Rumor rage, and memory march too. Let the echo of Boudica's wheels fade now, rolling off into memory's dusk, and listen instead for softer sounds that carry just as much weight, the whispers of desertion and doubt. Hear the clash of swords, quiets replaced by footsteps slipping away from the safety of the campfire's glow. One soldier at a time, deciding that no oath is stronger than fear. Picture a Roman fort at midnight. Inside the timber walls, the oil lamps gutter casting restless shadows across piles of javelins, half-packed crates, and sleeping forms wrapped in coarse blankets. Somewhere beyond the palisade, the fog curls like a beckoning hand. A young legionary stares at the mist from his post, the chill sinking through iron plates and into the soft animal panic beneath. Historians still argue whether desertion really plagued the legions as much as some scrolls claim. Some ancient writers painted deserters as cowards and traitors who fled into the woods to bargain with the Britons. Others suggest the truth is murkier, a few men slipping off in the night, driven by hunger, homesickness, or the soft poison of rumor that made 2 million enemies feel more real than 40,000 brothers in arms. A curious detail: some deserters carved small marks into their shields before they vanished. Tiny cuts or etched lines, a quiet apology or a curse left for whoever found the empty armor come morning. One tablet fragment suggests that commanders sometimes staged executions of captured deserters in sight of the entire camp discipline, by fear iron binding fear to loyalty when bread and glory ran thin. But not all who thought of slipping away actually did. Most stayed bound not just by discipline, but by the steady heartbeat of legion life. The comfort of rations handed out at dawn, the taste of watered wine, the rough camaraderie of insults traded over sharpening stones. For every pair of boots that vanished into the fog, dozens more remained, their doubts buried beneath the weight of the standard fluttering above. You stand in the hush, now leaning against a palisade post next to a soldier named Lucius. He dreams of the sun on the Tiber, the smell of his mother's bread, the warmth of a courtyard garden far from this wet island. He fingers the seam of his cloak, wondering how far he'd get before the mist swallowed him whole. But then a centurion's shout breaks the night patrol. Changing shifts, men stamping feet to shake off the cold. Lucius sighs, adjusts his helmet, and stays. Some scholars remain puzzled by this tension at the empire's edges. How could an army that boasted invincible discipline also carry so much quiet doubt inside its armor? Some say it was the sheer strangeness of Britain, its fog, its rumors, its painted warriors chanting in the trees that gnawed at the Roman sense of order. Others argue fear was always part of Rome's machinery, just hidden under layers of iron and ceremony until nights like this stripped them bare. A curious footnote: a few deserters were never caught. They melted into the tribes, traded Latin for rough island dialects, took up farming or fighting alongside former enemies. And centuries later, their descendants might have stood on hills, telling their children stories of how their forebears once faced Rome and survived not with swords alone, but with footsteps that carried them away from the empire's cold embrace. You drift through the camp now. A cook turns spit over a low fire, muttering about supply wagons late again. Two soldiers swap ghost stories about druids who punish oathbreakers. Farther off, a young guard tries to stay awake, eyes flicking to the tree line, where rumor says shadows move when no wind blows. There is no scholarly consensus on how many footsteps slipped away unnoticed, whether they mattered at all in the Empire's grand account books. But in the hush of your thoughts tonight, you feel each one echo like a heartbeat under the iron hum of Rome's discipline. Not every clash needs swords. Sometimes doubt alone can cut deeper than any spear whispers that slip through a camp like water through a cracked wall. And yet for every man who vanished into the mist, 100 more gripped their spears tighter, stared harder at the shadows, and reminded themselves that staying meant more than fear. Staying meant a name on a roll, a share of salt pork, a footnote in the chronicles that would one day boast how 40,000 held back millions, even if a few slipped away to tell a different story by another fire. Let the whispers of deserters fade behind you like footprints washed away by rain. Now step forward deeper into Britain's damp heart, where the fear of numbers and the clash of chariots hardened into something more lasting than rumor, the forts that lasted. Here stone outlives stories, and you stand in their cold shadows even now. Picture it some lonely hilltop, overlooking green valleys and curling rivers. Centuries ago, the ground trembled with the march of iron sandals and the rattle of wagons heavy with timber and stone. Roman engineers, rain dripping from their cowls, surveyed the slope, drove stakes into muddy earth, and began the quiet work of empire-building walls where wildness used to wander free. Some scholars remain puzzled by how quickly these forts rose ditch by ditch, palisade by palisade. Within weeks, a muddy slope transformed into a miniature Rome grid, streets parade grounds, storehouses smithies, hammering out fresh spear tips for the next clash just beyond the walls. You stand by a half-finished rampart, now the wooden stakes slick with rain. A centurion barks at slaves, and soldiers alike measure twice dig-deep laystones that will outlast the men who stack them. A curious detail, many forts began as wood and turf thrown up fast to shelter soldiers from the storms and spears. Later, stone replaced timber-lime mortar locked each block together, like a promise that Rome's order would hold even here at the world's damp edge. Inside these walls, life ticked on like a quiet heartbeat. Smiths sharpened blades beside smoking hearths. Bakers pulled loaves from clay ovens, feeding men who might die tomorrow in the next forest ambush. Messengers rode out from gates wide enough for wagons carrying orders and gossip along newly laid roads that snaked between forts like veins under skin. Outside, the land watched. Tribes tested these walls at night, probing gates, slipping arrows over palisades, sometimes burning a supply shed, just to remind Rome that stone alone could not tame the mist and bracken. Yet each dawn, the walls still stood, smoke still rose from hearths, and iron drills still echoed in cold courtyards. There is no scholarly consensus on whether these forts truly pacified Britain or merely scarred it. Some argue they tamed the tribes, pinning restive chiefs to the map with taxes treaties and the slow drip of Roman order. Others believe they were brittle shells, little islands of discipline surrounded by seas of defiance bribes and small garrisons propped up against a tide that never truly gave way. A curious footnote: many forts stood on older sites, places already sacred or strategic to the Britons long before Rome came. A hill fort becomes a Roman barracks. A sacred grove is cleared for parade ground drills. Stones laid for empire settle on bones of forgotten chiefs, binding old power to new rule, at least for a while. You drift now through one such fort in the hush before dawn. Torches flicker along the wooden ramparts. Inside, a guard yawns on his post eyes, scanning the mist. Somewhere deep in the barracks, a soldier carves his name into a timber beam, proof he was here, proof the wind and rain have not yet washed him from this edge of the world. Generations later, that beam rots, but the stone beneath stays. Archaeologists kneel in wet grass, centuries on brushing mud, from coins, scraps of chainmail, bits of broken amphorae. Each find whispers the same quiet truth. 40,000 men left footprints of iron. And though the numbers on scrolls may swell or shrink, the forts do not lie. Some researchers continue to debate whether these cold stones made the island Roman, or whether they stand as monuments to Rome's limits. Walls built not just to keep Britons out, but to keep Rome in drawing a line where empire ends, and old ghosts reclaim the land when no sentries watch the gates. Tonight, as you drift through this ruin in your thoughts, run your hand along a mossy block half buried under bracken. Imagine the clang of a hammer driving a spike into timber, the scrape of sandals on stone, the quiet prayers murmured under the hiss of British rain. Long after chariots crumbled to rust and painted warriors vanished into legend, these forts remain. Silent proof that the empire's greatest power was not just its legions or its scribes, but its stubborn belief that walls could hold back the wild world forever. And yet all walls crack, all stones shift. Only the wind knows which side truly won the iron heartbeat that built them, or the restless land that waits to take them back. Leave the cold stone ramparts behind now and wander into the hush, where fact fades into fireside tale, where myths that grew bloom wild and tangled in the minds of every storyteller who ever whispered how 40,000 Romans faced 2 million Britons under a sky thick with mist and omen. Picture the first of these myths, not in marble halls, but in a smoky hut, long after the forts fell silent. A child listens to an old warrior's cracked voice. They came in endless lines, shields like silver rivers, and we met them with spirits and storms. True, false. Somewhere in between. The warmth of the story matters more than any census ever did. Some scholars remain puzzled by how fast these numbers swelled in the centuries that followed. One scribe copies Caesar's old lines, but adds a flourish, 10,000 more warriors, maybe 20. A monk scribbles down a tale for his chronicle blending rumor with moral lesson, a tiny band of the faithful holding firm against hordes too wild to count. Over time, a small skirmish becomes an epic siege. A local chief becomes a king clad in iron myths. A curious detail, medieval writers sometimes inserted themselves into these older Roman tales, imagining distant ancestors standing shoulder to shoulder with legionaries or Britons alike. A dusty lineage suddenly crowned with heroism by the simple magic of ink and quill. A clever way to claim land glory, or just the right to sit by the fire as the tale spins on. You drift closer to such a fire now. A bard leans forward, voice low and rich with drama. In his telling, the Romans stood so few that each man fought 10 Britons at once. Chariots circled like thunder. Druids summoned lightning to split shields. The river ran red for days and carried the dead out to sea. Historians still argue how much of this ever happened. Some point to archaeological traces, bone spear tips, burned layers in river mud. Others remind us that memory is a tricky map, redrawn with each telling to suit whoever holds the quill. Myths are born in the gaps, facts leave behind fed by pride and fear in equal measure. A curious footnote, these stories often gave the Britons more glory in defeat than the Romans won in conquest. If you can't win the fight, win the legend. The Romans brought roads, baths, taxes, but the islanders kept the ghosts. Each storyteller made the enemy larger, the odds longer, the stand more heroic with every passing century. You wander through centuries, now past parchment-stained glass windows, tapestries woven with figures locked in eternal battle. By medieval times, the original head counts had ballooned into wild impossibilities. 2 million warriors swirling out of forests, 10,000 chariots clattering like thunder, Roman eagles shining so bright they turned night into dawn. Some researchers continue to debate whether these numbers mattered at all in practical terms. The real fight had long ended forts fallen to ruined standards buried under moss. But the myth lived on, passed from scribe to monk, to bard to schoolboy, scribbling notes in the margin of a Latin text. And these myths served purposes too. Kings looking to claim new thrones pointed to brave ancestors who once defied Caesar. Priests warning against pagan ways spun tales of druids calling down storms that only the true faith could quiet. Later empire builders found comfort in the story of small, disciplined bands taming vast, unruly lands, an echo they carried to new shores far beyond Britain. You stand in the hush now, a ghost among ghosts. Listen to the fire crackle as another storyteller clears his throat. He does not care for your questions about troop counts or supply lines. He cares for the hush, the held breath, the flicker of belief in the eyes around him. He tells you that 2 million warriors stood at the forest's edge because 2 million is a number big enough to make any victory or defeat feel bigger than bone and blade. Outside the hut, the wind hums through empty fields once trampled by real boots and wheels. Inside, the tale swells larger than the land that birthed it. Fact twists around rumor. Rumor wraps around hope, and in the hush between heartbeats, the old warrior leans close. Remember this, child. The numbers are just numbers. The fear, the pride, the echo in your dreams. Those last longer. And so they do. Step softly now into the circle of flickering lanterns and library shelves where the myths meet the microscopes of modern minds. This is Scholars' Disputes. Hear the roar of painted warriors and clashing iron quiets into the scratch of fountain pens, the tap of laptop keys, and the low murmur of historians who can't quite agree how many feet really march those muddy roads. Picture a lecture hall on a rainy evening. Rows of students, half dreaming, as an old professor adjusts his glasses, clears his throat, and projects a map of ancient Britain onto a cracked white wall. He points to Roman roads, traced like veins, fort sites marked with careful pins, burial mounds dotted where battles supposedly raged. Each dot a question mark wrapped in a story that's grown fat on centuries of retelling. Some scholars remain puzzled by the stubborn gulf between ancient boasts and archaeological finds. The records claim rivers of soldiers, forests full of chariots, but the bones tell quieter tales. Trenches yield spearheads, arrow tips, bits of Roman hobnails rusted together, yet not enough to count for millions. So the arguments tangle in the dark corners of library stacks and conference panels. One theory whispers that Caesar exaggerated to impress the Senate, every extra 1,000 Britons, a reason for extra coin, more honors, more marble statues in Rome's sunlit forums. Another theory counters that local Briton chiefs boasted equally spinning up their numbers like peacocks puffing feathers. More warriors meant more power at the council fire, more tribute offered more fear, struck into foreign invaders' hearts. A curious detail, some historians dig into pollen samples and charcoal layers in bogs to trace whether massive encampments ever left marks on the land. A sudden spike in burned wood, might hint at thousands of campfires flickering through a misty valley proof. Maybe that the myths hold a grain of grit, or maybe just proof of a good harvest festival gone up in flames. You drift among them, now scholars hunched over dusty manuscripts in flickering archive rooms, knees brushing boxes labeled Britannia Misc. One leans back, muttering about how the Roman scribes slipped convenient fiction into dry reports. Another insists the Britons' own oral legends hold truths hidden in riddles, and poetry truths the coins and broken pots can't refute. They bicker gently over tea. In break rooms, did the Romans really face 2 million spears? Or was it more like 20,000 with the shadows of the forest and the fear in the campfires adding a few phantom zeros? And if it was only 20,000, does it change the chill that still creeps through these stories? Some argue that the truth doesn't live in census ledgers, but in the feeling these numbers leave behind. A legionary on a wind-swept shore didn't count each enemy. He felt the weight of rumor pressing on his ribs when mist curled through the trees at dusk. And that weight, real or imagined, shaped every march, every battle plan scribbled on wax tablets. A curious footnote, now and then, a new discovery shifts the dispute all over again. A hoard of coins found in a field, a skeleton with chariot fittings buried deep in a farmer's pasture. Each clue fuels another round of gentle scholarly duels. Podcasts, papers heated footnotes passed back and forth like secret weapons. And yet, after the lectures end, after the last library lamp clicks off, the story settles back into your thoughts, like dust in an ancient hall. Maybe the scholars will never agree. Maybe the truth is a swirl of rumor pride and soft guesses carried forward on parchment and whispers. You sit quietly among them now, listening as the arguments ebb and flow. One scholar raises a finger. It doesn't really matter if it was 2 million or 2,000. The point is, the Romans believed it. The Britons needed them to believe it. And we, centuries later, can't help but lean in closer, because it makes the clash so grand. So you close the last book, slide the last manuscript back onto its shelf, and carry the dispute with you into the hush of your drifting mind, where the numbers still march in fog and fire, half real, half rumor, but all stubborn enough to survive every footnote. And maybe that's the final lesson the scholars can't quite stamp out. Some stories refuse to shrink down to the size of the bones left behind. And so we drift together into the final hush, past scribes and soldiers, past painted warriors, and dusty scrolls until we stand here in the quiet glow of why it still matters. Because even now, long after the last Roman fort crumbled into moss and meadow, those swollen numbers still whisper through British fog, threading myth and memory together in the folds of national pride. Picture a schoolchild tracing a finger over an old map, tiny islands perched on the edge of an empire that once dared claim the world. The teacher speaks of Romans landing on misty shores, of brave Britons standing uncountable under oak and thundercloud. Maybe she says 40,000 faced 2 million. Maybe the numbers slip by unnoticed, but the feeling, the chill of the small, standing up to the vast sticks like a burr in the mind. Some scholars remain puzzled by how fiercely these old stories anchor themselves in the soil of identity. Why cling to head counts no ledger can prove? Maybe because numbers, once they slip into legend, grow roots deeper than ruins. They become parables, tucked into national bedtime stories, how an island resisted, how an empire endured, how both myths shape a people's bones. A curious detail, the myth echoes in unexpected places, painted in the stained glass of Victorian churches, scribbled in the margins of medieval chronicles, breathed into the rhetoric of kings and politicians who saw in ancient skirmishes a reason to claim new lands under the same banner of iron will. Step into a modern museum now. Glass cases hold shards of spearheads, battered helmets, a rusted chariot fitting that might have rattled beside Boudicca's roaring wheels. Tourists shuffle past the display reading plaques that hedge their bets, estimated numbers, possible sites, likely exaggerations. Yet behind the careful wording, the same old wonder hums: did 40,000 truly hold back a sea of warriors? Or did 2 million stand on misted hills only in the dreams of frightened legionaries? You drift past a teenager on a school trip, half listening to an audio guide describing supply lines and tribal alliances. His eyes flick to the cracked stone of an old fort foundation outside the window, imagining Roman boots clanking down that path, imagining chariots flashing through twilight. The myth, warm and wild, fills the gaps between dates and artifacts, turning dry stone back into story. Historians still argue, but the numbers keep doing quiet work that no footnote can bury. They remind a modern island that resistance can be painted in any hue blue woad on bare skin, or the iron discipline of shields locked tight. They remind an empire's descendants that conquest depends not only on swords, but on parchment supply lines and the soft terror of rumors drifting from one flickering fire to another. A curious footnote: each generation tweaks the tale for its own use. Medieval kings told it to unite fractious nobles. Victorian scribes spun it to frame Britain as both unconquerable and destined to conquer. Modern writers trace the ghosts back through misty hills, unpicking the old boasts line by line, yet still somewhere in the hush. Between fact and fancy, they keep the myth alive. So here you stand, now at the edge of the mist, where story meets sleep. 40,000 Romans, 2 million Britons, whether true or not, the numbers remind us that history is never just bones in the ground. It's rumor, pride, fear, and longing braided together like threads of a banner fluttering on a damp hilltop no map can name. Close your eyes then, and let the ancient footfalls echo softly in your thoughts. Imagine the hush of painted warriors watching from the trees. Imagine the quiet rattle of a standard in salt wind. Imagine the scribe hunched over brittle parchment, deciding how many ghosts will stand beside you tonight. History is never settled. It flickers like a torch behind your eyelids, sometimes bright with iron discipline, sometimes wild with painted shadows. It lives on, not because it's perfectly counted, but because someone still cares enough to count it again. Yet beyond the counted legions and whispered numbers, another hush waits, woven not of armies, but of hidden voices that shaped the misty wilds while the empire watched in the rain. You stand where the Roman roads end muddy tracks crisscross a land thick with mossy oaks and the crackle of unseen campfires. The known world to the legions is ordered and paved, but here, under the damp green canopy, it's ruled by rumor, promise, and the shiver of tribal drums echoing through mist. Somewhere beyond the bracken, a woman sits in council. She's not crowned in gold, but in respect-braided hair, heavy with charms, voice low and decisive as flint struck to kindling. Historians still argue how many of these women rose to true command. Some scholars lean on scant Roman dispatches that marvel at savage women riding chariots. Others suspect legend-stitched truth and folklore so tightly they're impossible to tease apart. Yet grave after grave whispers the same defiance blades buried with small bones, brooches clasped on delicate ribs, war gear folded under silk and fur. You picture them tribal queens, seated among warriors, their words a binding charm more potent than iron. While Rome stamped its eagles onto stolen soil, these hidden matriarchs stitched alliances in whispers and glances, webs stronger than stone forts. Some would betray rivals to hold their own people safe. Others slipped messages through reed flutes, a soft tune on a river breeze that meant revolt at dawn. Quirky tales still surface local folklore hints at ghostly queens whose voices ride the wind over ancient earthworks at dusk. A farmer in Northumbria once swore he saw a cloaked figure by a burial mound, her hand resting on the pommel of a corroded sword. Maybe he'd had too much cider, or maybe old queens don't sleep easy when no one remembers their names. In villages scattered between hedgerows, elders passed down scraps of memory nursery rhymes about milkmaids who were once shield maidens, or place names that carry the syllables of queens lost to written records. Even now, archaeologists dig up tiny clues, a warrior's spear, notched combs charms, buried with burnt offerings. Each artifact pulls back a curtain on what Rome's scribes tried to flatten into footnotes. And you, in the hush of this drifting moment, hold the edge of that curtain. Feel how it rustles. A forgotten queen waits there, half shadow, half flesh. She's neither ghost nor goddess, but something more stubborn, an echo with a heartbeat, riding the wind through a land that was never truly tamed. A thin curl of smoke winds through a chilly dawn. Cardamandua's domain hides behind hills draped in low mist, her power balanced on secrets sharper than any Roman gladius. Cartimandua, queen of the Brigantes, rarely roared like Boudica. Instead, she chose betrayal over battlefield glory. At least that's what the Roman scribes liked to say. They called her cunning faithless, an ally who turned native heroes over for shiny coins and fleeting favor. But slip your feet into her worn leather sandals. For a moment, you'd find the ground soft, marshy, with shifting loyalties, and every choice edged with threats from across the sea. When the Romans pressed north, they found Cartimandua already draped in authority. Her people respected her lineage and her web of spies. Some say she captured Caradicus, the famed British rebel, and handed him to Rome, not out of treachery, but cold calculation. Keeping the eagle off her door, while her people sharpened spears under their cloaks. Could you blame her for playing two games at once? Historians still debate her motives, piecing together scraps of Tacitus's half-flattering, half-condemning lines. Did she truly sell out her own? Or did she gamble with imperial trust to keep her tribe breathing a little longer? Surviving records offer no clear answer, only the hush of centuries where truth rusts like an abandoned shield. Beneath the formal alliances, a quirkier truth rustles. Cartimandua didn't just hold a throne, she danced on one. Tales whisper that she loved jewels, traded gossip with Roman envoys, and even divorced her husband for his armor-bearer. Scandalous by Roman standards, scandalous by ours, but perhaps sensible by hers. Power demands loyalty in odd places. Sometimes a lover's spear at your side is more trustworthy than an old prince's promises. In roundhouses, tucked behind thorny hedges, her name lingered in hushes long after her fall. Mothers would hush children's squabbles with tales of Cartimandua's sharp tongue, her sly bargains that saved villages from fire. Some fragments claim she fled when the Brigantes revolted, slipping away like mist. Others insist she died as she lived surrounded by whispered deals, her name carved quietly into the soil where no Roman boot would tread. Walk with her ghost, now through bracken and heather, where secret paths knot the hillsides. You feel the drizzle, the taste of iron in the air. This is her world, shifting between loyalty and treachery with every damp heartbeat. The Romans might have stamped their law on stone, but Cardamandua's domain was written on moss, and rumor living long after marble crumbled. A low wind rustles the heather as you kneel beside an ancient burial mound, the earth damp beneath your fingertips. Here lie the secrets of warrior women, whose weapons were tucked gently into the crooks of their arms, as if steel and flesh belonged together even in sleep. Archaeologists pry open these barrows with brushes and trowels, unwrapping centuries of soil like delicate cloth. Inside, they find the same surprise again and again, a sword nestled beside a small frame, spearheads aligned with fine combs, shield bosses resting near spindle whorls. It's easy to believe these graves must belong to men. After all, who would imagine a woman with a blade in her hand ready to fight invaders from beyond the channel? But bone shapes don't lie, nor do the trinkets tucked under ribs. Some skeletons wear the marks of childbirth alongside the nicks of battle. Some hold iron blades engraved with runes, tiny animal charms tied to leather hilts. Historians still disagree. Were these true fighters or symbols? Queens whose buried weapons spoke of status rather than skirmish. There's no scholarly consensus, only a hush that clings to the edges of these burial mounds like morning mist. Once, a burial on the Isle of Thanet yielded a brooch of amber and silver near a short sword, so well worn its edge had splintered. Some say it belonged to a charioteer queen, a woman who rode at dawn and slept at dusk, with war still humming under her skin. Others whisper she was a priestess blade, unsheathed, not for slaughter, but for ceremony. Nobody can say for certain, and perhaps that uncertainty is the softest truth these graves hold. Power doesn't always shout its name. You lean closer, feeling the cold pull of history around your shoulders. The burial mound hums with secrets too heavy for words. In local tales, children dare each other to run 3 times around the grassy dome at dusk. Do it right, they say, and you'll glimpse a pale rider, her sword raised in greeting, before she fades back into the shadows. A harmless dare for restless boys, until someone's dog won't follow tail, pressed low to the wet earth. Under your touch, the soil feels alive with memory. These warrior women left no parchment, no scrolls to brag about their deeds. Their legacy lies in iron slowly rusting beside them, in jewelry twisted from gold, and gilt in the hush that silences visitors who stand too long beside their resting place. You wonder if the queens dreamed of this sleeping forever under hillocks, and heather their weapons waiting for hands that will never lift them again. And yet, in the hush of the burial mound, you sense a promise humming under the soil. The promise that power can be quiet hidden, wrapped in linen and peat, but it never really dies. It waits for someone like you to lean close, listen, and imagine the world as it might have been, where swords and women's hands belong together as easily as dawn and mist. A soft drizzle patters against the bracken as you follow an unseen trail deeper into the heart of the tribe's secret world, where words carried more weight than steel, and betrayal sometimes wore a woman's smile. Tonight, you slip into the shadows with the spies and saboteurs who lived between whispers and war cries. Picture a young woman wrapped in a coarse wool cloak, slipping through thorn hedges under a moonless sky. She carries no weapon you'd recognize, just a wicker basket of salted fish and a tongue sharp enough to trade secrets for survival. In the tangled politics of Britain's tribal confederacies, women made perfect spies. Who would suspect the weaver's daughter bringing ale to a rival's fire, or the healer offering herbs to an enemy chieftain. Roman commanders scratched their heads at reports of shifting allegiances. Some tribes switched sides with dizzying speed, promising loyalty to Caesar's legions one week and to local rebels the next. Behind these pivots often stood a silent network of women who ferried messages through kitchens, market stalls, and forest paths hidden from armored patrols. Some carried coded tokens, a carved bead, here a bent brooch, pinned there small signs that meant sabotage was set for dawn. Surviving records offer little clarity. Roman scribes barely mention these shadows. What scraps remain speak of double agents who vanished into forests when deals soured. Some scholars remain puzzled by how easily Rome underestimated these covert webs spun from gossip trade and kinship. It wasn't the brute force of swords that twisted the empire's plans in knots. It was the everyday invisibility of women who knew when to listen, when to lie, and when to vanish into the night. Quirky local tales linger in corners of the countryside. In a quiet Devon village, a well is said to mark the spot where a queen spy dropped her final message woven into the lining of a reed basket weighted with stones so it would sink into secrecy forever. Children still toss pebbles into its murky depths, daring each other to wish for secrets best left buried. You step over moss-slick stones, imagining the hush of voices trading treachery under oak boughs. A saboteur, in plain dress, might slip poison berries into an enemy's stew, or scatter rumors that sent whole hunting parties chasing shadows. These women weren't nameless pawns. They were the fine threads binding tribes to survival or ruin. Some worked alone. Others gathered in loose circles, passing coded chants through family lines. One might nurse the chief's child by day, then feed false maps to a rival scout by night. Some wore tiny bronze knives, hidden in braids, useless in battle, but perfect for cutting messages loose from secret hiding places. You can almost hear them now. Footsteps light on fallen leaves, breath misting in the cold air. Their stories slip through your mind like the flick of a knife's edge, sharp silent, gone before the empire's scribes could fix their names to parchment. And maybe that's the point. True power, the kind that lives in rumor and half-remembered tales, never stands still long enough to be pinned down. So when you drift deeper into sleep tonight, think of the women who played the empire at its own game. Spies without medals, saboteurs without statues, just shadows stitched into the fabric of a land that was never as tame as Rome pretended. And if you listen closely, past the rain and the restless wind, you might catch the hush of a secret traded in the dark, a reminder that not every war is fought with blades alone. Dawn creeps through the mist as you wander into a grove so silent you can almost hear the secrets clinging to its branches. Here, in these hidden clearings, ringed with ancient oaks, you meet the druidic sisterhoods women bound, not by crown or sword, but by whispered rites that made Rome shiver at shadows it couldn't name. Step lightly. Moss carpets the clearing soft underfoot. You can almost sense the hush of chanting voices, the faint burn of sweet herbs swirling up through the leaves. While the legions built forts and roads to tame the land, these groves stayed defiantly unpaved green cathedrals where sacred oaths passed from tongue to tongue under moonlight. And in the center stood the women priestesses, midwives, seers, and healers. Roman historians like to flatten them into witches and rebels, weaving stories of blood rites and ominous omens to justify the axe and the torch. Some scholars remain divided on how much of that was real and how much was clever propaganda to cast local resistance as barbaric magic. There's no tidy scroll listing the names of these druidic women, only hints in weathered place names, folk rhymes and shrines, half buried under hedgerows and stone fences. One quirky tale from Welsh folklore tells of a sisterhood who gathered every solstice near a sacred well. It's said they dropped silver trinkets into its depths, each charm a promise of safe birth, good harvest, or quiet revenge. To the Romans, this looked like witchcraft. To the tribes, it was power woven into water and word. Children still toss coins into that well today, hoping the old spirits haven't lost their taste for shiny bribes. Under your feet, roots twist like old stories. These groves weren't just altars for revolt. They were places where wisdom passed silently from mother to daughter, where herbs were pressed into wounds, where omens were read in crow feathers and curling smoke. You sense the hush of layered generations, an echo that resists the hammer of history books. Some scholars puzzle over mentions of women leading chants before battle, anointing warriors with secret oils that promised courage or confusion. Did it truly work? Or was it simply faith draped in ritual, a way to stitch fear into something bearable when iron clashed on iron at dawn? There's no neat consensus, only the rustle of leaves where old oaths still cling. Imagine standing among them, torches guttering faces, half-shadowed under woven hoods. One sister carves a symbol into soft bark. Another ties charms of bone and copper into your hair. No scroll survives to capture her name, but somewhere in the hush of your drifting thoughts, you feel her hand press cool against your brow, promising strength as the forest closes in around you. And when the Romans sent axes to these groves, claiming to cut out rebellion at its root, they found roots run deeper than any blade can reach. The sacred trees fell, but the stories clung on, hidden in lullabies and place names carried in soft songs around winter fires. Tonight, as you lie wrapped in quiet, the druidic sisterhoods wait behind your eyelids, leaves rustling like distant whispers. They remind you that power doesn't always roar. It can hum low, among the trees, slipping from mouth to mouth, until even empires can't stamp it out. So breathe deep and linger in this sacred hush a little longer. The grove is yours tonight, uncharted, unburned, its secrets safe in the dark corners where history forgets to look. The fire in the roundhouse crackles low as you step inside, ducking beneath a thatched doorway into the warm hush of Britain's hidden domestic empires. Here in the hum of weaving looms and the steam of bubbling stew pots, tribal queens and their kin-built kingdoms, one spindle twist and barley loaf at a time. It's easy to picture ancient power as a war drum, loud clangorous, armored in bronze and iron. But slip closer to the hearth, and you'll find a softer force, one that shaped clans and confounded conquerors without ever lifting a blade. Domestic power, the art of survival, disguised as daily routine, humming under the chatter of children and the clatter of pottery. You kneel beside the loom fingers, brushing coarse wool threads, dyed with crushed berries and bark. Every inch of cloth spun here meant warmth trade or tribute woven by hands that remembered which neighbor owed what, who was loyal, who needed a quiet gift to bind them closer. Some scholars still debate whether these tasks were chores or cunning politics dressed in homespun. The truth likely drifts somewhere in between, like smoke curling up to the thatch. Picture a matriarch at dawn, her spindle turning while she hums old chants. Around her, daughters twist flax and grind grain into flour. Outside, men polish spearheads, but they'll eat the bread, first bread, that proves alliances hold. Historians often forget that roundhouses were more than sleeping quarters. They were nerve centers of soft negotiation. Every meal a chance to win loyalty, bite by bite. A quirky discovery once turned up in a Scottish dig a clay pot sealed tight, filled with preserved butter, hidden near the hearth. Was it a ritual, offering a winter store, or a quiet bribe for a neighbor in lean times? Nobody knows for certain. What remains clear is that inside these smoky walls, trust and trade were kneaded as carefully as dough. Look around, the shadows, baskets brim with dried herbs, carved spoons hang on rough posts. Firelight flickers off bronze brooches pinned to tunics. Children tug at mothers' skirts, learning which plants heal wounds and which leaves make dyes bright enough to catch a trader's eye 2 villages away. Each small lesson weaves into something bigger, a web of know-how that outlasts broken treaties and Roman raids. Historians still argue how much power these domestic queens truly held. Some dismiss the quiet work of feasting and farming as lesser than the clash of chariots. But dig deeper, and you'll find chronicles of entire villages swayed by one matron's feast, her larder stocked enough to feed a hungry warband or starve an upstart rival into submission. No fortress walls needed just barley-salted pork and a promise to share when the snow came heavy and late. You settle closer to the hearth, the warmth seeping into your bones as you listen to the soft shuffle of feet, the dull thud of a pestle against grain. This is how quiet empires rise, not with trumpet blasts, but with the creak of a loom, the hiss of stew on hot stones, the muted gossip traded over steaming bowls. Outside, Rome pushes its boundaries ever forward, mile by mile, mile by mile. Inside, the women mine the barley and the wool, and the secrets folded into baskets, lined with rushes. Empires crumble when their roads crack, and their armies scatter, yet in the hidden corners of roundhouses, new seeds are always planted, tended, and passed on in whispers. So when you next imagine queens of old, don't stop at the war cry and the sword. Let your mind drift back to this low fire, this circle of warmth, this quiet authority wrapped in smoke and woven cloth. Here amid humble walls and the scent of baking bread, power hums in soft, steady beats, waiting patiently until the world outside remembers who truly fed it all along. Your breath catches on the chill breeze as you step outside the roundhouse and hear the low rumble of wheels over damp earth. Now, through drifting mist and trampled bracken, you glimpse the charioteer queen's figures perched high above the muddy chaos hair, braided tight with charms that dance like tiny armor against the wind. Britain's ancient warriors weren't all grizzled chieftains swinging swords in battle cries. Some sat behind the reins of rattling chariots, commanding speed, surprise, and spectacle in equal measure. And among them, legends say, rode women, whose presence turned skirmishes into songs whispered for generations. The Romans, with their orderly legions and well-drilled cavalry, didn't quite know what to make of these charioteers. Surviving accounts marvel at how tribal fighters used chariots not like tanks, but like stage platforms rushing into battle, hurling spears, wheeling away before the enemy could blink. Some scholars remain puzzled over just how many women held these reins, but burial finds a bronze harness here, delicate beads woven into horse tack. Their hint that more than one queen knew how to grip a leather strap and lean into the rush of hooves. Imagine the ground shaking under your feet, wheels carving grooves into wet turf, as warriors leap on and off like dancers in iron-studded boots. On the chariot stands a queen, back straight eyes, bright, with the glint of river-polished stones tied into her braids. Each charm, a prayer, some for strength, some for speed, a few for luck when the spears began to fly. Quirky old folk songs from Cornwall and Wales tell of women who tied silver coins into their braids before battle, a glimmer of wealth to catch the enemy's eye and distract from the blade slipping between ribs. Children still braid charms into their hair for festivals, echoing these long-lost riders in tiny glittering gestures that ripple forward through centuries. Stand at the edge of this makeshift battlefield in your mind, damp grass clinging to your boots, breath misting as hooves thunder past. The chariot spins, mud splatters, a spear whistles over your shoulder and bites deep into a wooden shield. The queen steadies herself with one hand on the rail, the other lifting a blade streaked with rain and iron resolve. She shouts no orders. Her presence is command enough, her braid charms flickering like tiny pennants in the storm. Historians argue whether these queens truly fought or merely appeared their presence a rallying flag for warriors who needed a glimpse of divine courage. There is no tidy scroll to confirm or deny the truth, just the hush of burial mounds where horse bones rest beside human ones, reins folded carefully under ribs that once rose and fell to the drumbeat of hooves. When Rome pressed deeper into this land, its generals bragged of crushing chariots under armored formations, of making spectacle submit to discipline. Yet even as wheels splintered and roads spread their straight lines like veins across the wild hills, songs of the charioteer queens lingered in hedgerow ballads and tavern boasts. You stand still now, the last echo of wheels fading into the mist behind your eyes. Somewhere you can almost hear the faint jingle of bronze charms tangled in hair, the ghost rumble of hooves carrying a name that never quite died. And you wonder, did the wheels really stop? Or did they just spin inward, buried deep in stories that only surface when the night grows quiet enough to listen? So hold that image as sleep tugs at your shoulders. A queen at the reins, mud and mist streaking her skin, charms clinking like distant bells, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond Roman roads. If you ever braid a ribbon into your hair, tomorrow smile at the thought it might just carry a whisper of those hidden wheels still turning somewhere under the hush of ancient soil. The air cools as you drift from the battlefield's muddy churn to a flickering fire at night, where bards hunch close voices, low, turning deeds into verses that slip past Roman ears like wind through reeds. Tonight, you sit among them, listening for the secrets hidden in rhyme and rhythm, the soft boasting that keeps the names of Britain's tribal queens alive long after the wheels of their chariots rust to dust. Picture a bard wrapped in a weathered cloak harp, resting against his knee. His fingers pluck out a tune older than any road the legions could lay. Around him, warriors lean in, close their rough laughter, softening as each verse winds toward the heart of the story. Not the clash of iron, but the women who made iron worth lifting. Historians still debate how much of this oral memory is fact, how much is embroidered night after night beside smoky hearths. Surviving Roman scribes barely mention the poets, except to mock their strange chants echoing through village lanes. But local tales say, otherwise verses slipped into lullabies, woven into work songs, hidden under breath when patrols drew near. Some of these bards served a single queen, their loyalty paid in roasted meat, fine ale, and a warm corner by the fire. Others wandered from tribe to tribe, passing news dressed in rhyme. Quirky local legends tell of one such poet who refused Roman gold to hush his tales, preferring, instead, to carve his queen's name into a standing stone deep in a birch grove. The carving faded, the poet's bones sank into peat, yet his lines live on in the sing-song memory of a handful of farmers who swear they hear whispers in the wind when dusk settles over the old grove. You sit by the fire now, embers crackling faces half lit in shifting orange glow. The bard's voice dips and rises, weaving the image of a queen riding out at dawn, charms rattling in her braids, spear raised not for slaughter, but for survival. Each boast is part truth, part spell, binding fear to courage, defeat to hope. And in the hush that follows each verse, you feel the warm weight of those hidden stories settle into your bones. Some bards crafted insults, two mocking rivals in riddles that still echo in village sayings. A clever insult slipped into a song could shame a betrayer more effectively than any spear, because once a rhyme stuck to your name, it followed you like a shadow at dusk. Some scholars remain puzzled at how these playful jabs shaped alliances, tipping the balance of power with nothing more than a clever tongue and a borrowed tune. Even today, place names linger as soft echoes of these boasts' hillocks named for a queen's triumph, streams for the weaver who fed her army old stones that once held a poet's scratched verse, now lost to moss and time. You can trace these whispers, if you listen, as you drift off syllables that slip under hedgerows and past stone fences, threading the past to the hush of your breathing. And maybe, if your dreams lean close enough to the fire tonight, you'll hear a line or two fragments of praise, half sung by a voice that's long dust, but somehow still here, stitching these hidden matriarchs back together in rhyme. So breathe slow, feel the warmth at your feet, the old harp string humming in the hush. In this moment, the boasting bard's promise is yours too, that stories once given to the night never really die. They linger like embers in the dark, waiting for a listener brave enough or sleepy enough to lean in and listen again. A chill draft slips under a Roman commander's cloak as he scrawls a dispatch by lamplight ink, pooling around the letters that try and fail to capture the strangeness of what he's seen. Tonight you peer over his shoulder eyes, tracing stiff Latin lines that describe not the usual spoils of conquest, but something far more unsettling: women giving orders that make disciplined legions pause mid-march. Rome, the empire that flattened hills for roads and renamed rivers as if the land would politely obey, was never ready for the sight of queens whose power didn't bow to their marble statues and gold eagles. Dispatches from the edge of the known world speak of female chieftains, rallying war bands, of mothers standing guard on palisade walls, of daughters slipping away under cover of rain to spread word of revolt. Some scribes inked these stories with grudging respect, others dripped their quills with venom, branding these women unnatural, savage, and out of place. Historians still pore over these stiff Roman lines, squinting at half-legible reports sent back to generals lounging in warm villas far from Britain's damp chill. Some scholars argue that Roman fear inflated these stories, turning ordinary women into warrior queens to make the empire's victories shine brighter. Others insist that if Rome bothered to record it, even with bias, then somewhere under the layers of dismissive mockery and startled praise is a glint of raw truth. One quirky dispatch survives, describing a skirmish where a small band of legionaries soaked to the bone and hungry for dry bread stumbled on a gathering of locals in a clearing. At its heart sat a woman on a low stool, braids looped with charms, a spear resting across her knees. The Roman officer wrote almost grudgingly that her eyes fixed the men in place as though she were iron and they were reeds. No name, no details, just a flicker of a queen holding her ground, with nothing but presence and patience. You stand in the corner of that clearing, now hidden behind brambles, slick with rain. Imagine the hiss of the legionaries' torches sputtering in the drizzle, the soft creak of leather armor, the faint thrum of your own heartbeat, trying to match the calm of the woman on the stool. She says nothing. She doesn't need to. Her warriors know the plan, and the Romans' men, who have crossed seas and slaughtered kingdoms, shuffle uneasily in the mud, unsure if the conquest they brag about in scrolls holds up under this dripping canopy of oak leaves and owl cries. Some dispatches fixate on details that feel oddly intimate, the pattern of a queen's cloak, the wild braid that looped down her back, the bone charms that rattled like tiny war drums when she moved. Perhaps these scribes didn't mean to preserve her power yet in trying to belittle it. They handed us an accidental gift, a glimpse of command that didn't fit their columns of tribute and tribute takers. You can almost hear the scratch of the quill, the muttered curses of a Roman clerk forced to describe what made no sense within the neat boxes of empire. To them, a woman with a sword was unsettling enough, but a woman who commanded without it, who drew warriors close with a glance, who turned forest clearings into hidden courts. This was a puzzle too large to name outright. So they left us fragments, instead, dispatches that trail off mid-sentence reports, that skip from boast to fear, and back again. They tried to claim these lands by flattening them onto maps, but the whispers of matriarchs bled through the parchment all the same, refusing to be pinned down by ink and official seals. Tonight, you hold one of those scraps in your mind, its edges soft with age and drizzle. Let the words fade into the hush between your thoughts. Somewhere in that hush, a queen sits on her low stool, her braid heavy with charms, her eyes steady enough to outlast the empire that thought a few lines of ink could bury her for good. You stand at the forest's edge now, breath frosting in the hush, between heartbeat and footfall, peering into the tangled green, where paths vanish under bramble and secrecy. This is where resistance lives when war cries falter, when defeat nips at a leader's heels, and the only way to fight is to slip into shadows too thick for Rome's neat formations to follow. Imagine it, a band of weary warriors, cloaks damp with drizzle, slipping single file through mossy thickets, their breath merging with the mist that clings to low branches. At their center rides the queen, her cloak torn at the hem braid, charms muffled in scraps of wool to hush their telltale clink. She knows the land better than any road builder or map maker, every deer path a lifeline, every hollow tree a hiding place. When the legions came crashing north and west, driving stakes into soggy fields and raising forts like boastful scars, the tribal queens did not always meet them with head-on fury. Sometimes they vanished instead into forests so dense a Roman spear turned useless, into marshes where horses floundered and roads dissolved into hungry bogs. Some historians argue whether these retreats were acts of cowardice or cunning. Some say they mark the moment these women lost power. Others see them as proof that true strength bends, folds itself into the land, waits for the right moment to emerge again. A quirky tale from the borderlands says that once a queen and her loyal band burrowed so deep into a forested valley that Roman scouts wandered in circles for weeks, spooked by owl calls that seemed to mimic human voices. Local shepherds still swear you can hear her laughter echo through the trees on nights when the wind shifts, just so part warning, part welcome if you know how to listen. You slip through this forest now, your boots sinking into damp leaf litter. Overhead, branches creak, as if whispering secrets from branch to branch. The path winds between twisted roots and sudden hollows that could swallow a careless foot. Each step is a promise to disappear, to keep alive a story the Empire tried to erase with roads and records. In roundhouses, rebuilt far from watchtowers, these leaders waited out the Roman tide. They stitched alliances in the hush, between raids, hid blades under hay bales, trained sons and daughters to fight or flee as the shifting winds demanded. Resistance was never just the spear. It was the hush that fell over a village when scouts passed through the warning woven into a basket of bread left at the edge of the woods. Historians still debate how many of these hidden retreats truly existed. Some dismiss them as folklore village, boasts grown wild around winter fires. But every so often, a dig turns up a hollowed hearth, far from any Roman road, or a cluster of roundhouse stones deep in an ancient copse, and scholars frown, squint and scribble footnotes that say softly, maybe. Your breath joins the mist now warm against the damp chill. You imagine crouching beside that queen as she maps the next move with a stick scraped across wet earth. Her warriors lean close, listening for the crack of twigs that might mean betrayal or rescue. Her braid charms stay silent tonight, tucked under layers of cloth and caution. She doesn't need the clink of silver to prove her crown. The forest itself wears her mark, branches bent, just so bracken crushed in patterns only her people know how to read. Somewhere ahead, a path splits. One trail leads deeper into the woods, the other back toward open fields, where the Empire marches in bright rows. You know which path she'll choose, which path you'd follow too, if you could into the hush under the boughs, far from history's cold marble statues. And maybe if you press your ear to the bark of an old oak tonight, you'll catch the faint footfall of a retreat that was never truly a defeat, just a queen and her people stepping sideways into stories that no empire could fully tame. The forest falls away behind you, now opening to a raw, windswept clearing, where uneasy peace is bartered in whispers and sidelong glances. This is the realm of captives and bargains, where tribal queens cornered by iron legions and dwindling stores traded what they could not afford to lose people promises and pieces of themselves that history would never record in marble. Picture a narrow clearing, ringed with watchful spearmen. In the center stand two figures, cloaked against the chill one, a Roman envoy, silver clasp at his throat, gleaming even under a leaden sky. The other, a queen whose braid charms have been tucked away, whose voice is softer here than on any battlefield. Between them stands a boy, no more than 12 hair-tangled and eyes wide with the bewildered calm of someone too young to grasp that he is both treasure and threat. Some historians speak dryly of hostage exchanges as if they were tidy transactions, tokens swapped like sacks of grain. But these were no simple trades. A captive child bound a tribe to uneasy peace, one false move, and a mother's whispered promises dissolved in the echo of Roman boots on stone roads. The queen might hold her head high while handing over a son or nephew, but inside her chest, the cost rang louder than any coin. Surviving records offer only cold hints, short lines scribbled on tablets about hostages given in good faith, as if trust was something that could be signed and sealed. Yet local tales say otherwise. They murmur of queens who made bargains with sly conditions, children sent to Roman camps with hidden charms sewn into tunics, or secret oaths bound to old forest gods ensuring that if the empire broke its word, vengeance would follow, like wolves in the night. One quirky legend tells of a captive princess traded for the promise that her people could keep their sacred groves untouched. She lived in a stone villa near the fort, they say, teaching Roman ladies the old songs, while scribes tried and failed to banish her stories from polite ears. Some claim that when she grew old, she vanished into the woods. One spring night, the iron locks on her chamber left unbroken, her cloak heavy with stolen scrolls she never let the empire keep, stand by the fire in a smoky roundhouse, and you'd hear elders hush the children with these tales, part warning, part comfort. Remember, they'd murmur, sometimes we give away what's dearest, so the rest of us can see another dawn. It's not a hero's tale, sung by bards with booming voices, but a quieter survival bartered piece by piece under watchful eyes. You stand in that clearing now, the wind pulling at your cloak, the hush between two voices binding a future that neither side fully trusts. The queen's gaze doesn't waver, though her fingers tighten around the folds of her sleeve. The Roman envoy shifts, adjusts the scroll in his hand, pretending the child beside him is just another line in the ledger. Some scholars argue whether these bargains were betrayals or brilliance, whether they showed a people cornered or cunning enough to buy time for the next revolt. There's no single answer, only the echo of footsteps fading into cold barracks, while mothers stand by the fire spinning threads and stories that tie their children to home, no matter how far empire walls stretch. You can almost feel it now, the cold promise pressed into that child's palm, a carved bead or tiny charm hidden in a pocket, a reminder that he carries more than his own fate across the Roman roads. And if you listen close, you might hear the soft secret promises made under breath that someday maybe he will come home. Or, if he does not, the story will. So stand a little longer in this clearing. Let the wind bite your cheeks. Let the hush hold you steady. Here, queens trade, not for gold or glory, but for time, for breath, for a fragile thread that keeps a people alive long enough to slip back into the shadows when the empire turns away. Dawn creeps pale over a windswept hill, and you find yourself standing among low mounds and half-buried stones, graves and relics that mumble secrets no Roman scroll ever fully silenced. Here lie the quiet proofs that tribal queens, warrior women, and matriarchs once carved their names not on marble, but on bones and brooches hidden under layers of turf and time. Bend low, brush the frost from an ancient slab. See how a spiral pattern curls across its surface, carved by hands long gone cold. Some say these spirals mark a gateway for the dead. Others swear they're a map for the living clues to where more secrets lie folded under the soil. Historians still argue if such markings are mere decoration or coded stories, each theory as fragile as the bones resting beneath. Step further, where archaeologists have dug careful trenches to peel back centuries like old blankets. They find things that don't quite fit the clean lines of conquest, delicate clasps beside battle-worn blades, iron knives nestled under amber beads, and skeletons that once wore the scars of childbirth and combat in the same frame. Some graves hold charred remnants of feasts, boar bones, charred barley ceramic cups that once brimmed with honeyed mead. Were these offerings for the journey beyond, or final boasts laid beside queens who feasted as fiercely as they fought? One quirky find turned up in a Yorkshire barrow, a woman buried with an iron sword laid crosswise over her ribs, a copper mirror at her feet, and a single wildflower seed tucked into the fold of her cloak. No one knows what it meant. A charm, a promise, a sign that even in death, Her reflection and her blade were bound together. Local folklore says, on Midsummer's Eve, a pale figure stands by that grave, combing her hair with the blade's broken tip. More poetry than proof. But sometimes, poetry holds a truth too slippery for dry parchment. The relics speak soft and contradictory. Some scholars still cling to Roman accounts that dismiss these women as rumors, blown out of proportion, brave outliers, never true leaders. Yet here you stand, boots sinking into damp turf, staring down at swords where no man's bones lie. The relics care little for tidy empire logic. They hum under the soil, pushing up wildflowers and twisted hawthorn, insisting in rust and silver that history is rarely what the victors claim. You wander between these resting places, now feeling how the wind shifts when you cross from mound to mound. Some graves sit alone on hilltops, others hide in the folds of valleys, marked by nothing more than a ring of darker grass. Elders say those patches stay green, even in drought, fed by secrets that still hunger for telling. A flicker of candlelight catches your eye, an offering left by someone half believing, half hoping the old queens might still listen. Flowers, beads, a few coins balanced on a weathered stone, small tokens, gentle bargains struck between past and present. Even now, when road signs and fences crisscross the land, people slip away to these ancient beds, to kneel, to press cold hands, to warmer earth, to whisper hopes into the hush. Beneath your feet, a brooch rusts slowly back to soil. Its curve once held a cloak, tight against the shoulder of a woman who might have ridden chariots, brokered fragile pacts, or spun gossip into revolt. Some historians insist this is just ceremony status, not battle. Others point to nicks on the metal that match sword edges, insisting it was clasped tight in real conflict. There's no agreement, only the hush that drifts through damp grass and softens your thoughts as you stand watch over these restless beds. So close your eyes for a moment, feel the hush, the heartbeat under the turf. Each grave hums its own half-told tale, a clash of steel, a mother's lullaby, a final promise whispered to the mossy dark. None of it tidy, none of it certain, yet all of it somehow still here. Step away from the mossy graves now, and find yourself hunched over a flickering candlestacks of battered books and crumbling scrolls piled high around you. This is where the living queens slip into the realm of puzzles, where scholars argue endlessly over scraps of bone and half-remembered songs, trying to pin down these hidden matriarchs like moths beneath glass. In dusty archives, from Oxford to Edinburgh, historians flip pages and squint at brittle Latin lines, chasing the truth of queens who left behind no golden statues, only whispers trapped in bogs and barrows. Were they rulers in the sense Rome would respect a throne, a crown, a line of succession? Or were they fierce caretakers of tribes too stubborn to vanish when roads and forts came crawling across the moors? Some scholars cling to the idea that stories of these queens are just folklore spun wild by bards who needed heroes to hush the dark. Others point to the weight of the relics, the blades under slender bones, the chariot harness buried with a woman's comb, the dispatches that grudgingly admit to female command when the Roman lines buckled in the rain. There's no scholarly consensus, only the puzzle of power half-sketched in silver and rust. One historian once found a line in an old monastery ledger, a note about the widow of the northern chieftain, who mustered more men than her late husband ever could. No name, no further detail, just a sidelong glimpse that hints at how leadership sometimes flickered, where scribes weren't paid to look. Quirky footnotes like that litter the margins of British history, small doors swinging open for the curious. Sit with that puzzle for a moment. Imagine the scholar who spends a lifetime hunting these ghost queens, Knuckles' ink-stained eyes, red from candle smoke, muttering to themselves as they trace a connection from a bent brooch found in Wales to a half-burned verse tucked inside a bard's ballad. The pieces never quite fit, never click into a single clear portrait. Instead, they overlap like shadows. In torchlight Cardimandua's sly bargains, the grave goods hidden in the peat, the Roman dispatches, written in startled Latin, about women at the head of lines that wouldn't break. Some scholars find this uncertainty maddening, a crack in the neat timeline of who ruled who conquered what. Others find comfort in the gaps. After all, history carved in stone can be twisted to flatter an emperor. But history buried in wet soil and half sung in a lullaby can slip past empire and crawl up through the cracks, humming secrets into modern ears. A quirky tale says a library in Northumberland holds a tattered parchment that, when read aloud on a moonless night, calls forth the whispers of the old queens. More likely, it's just a misfiled charter about cattle. But somewhere between superstition and footnote, the puzzle hums on each guess, another thread looped into the fabric these matriarchs wove when the world thought them silent. You turn a brittle page candlelight, flickering across your knuckles. Under your breath, you read the lines out loud, half incantation, half prayer, that this puzzle might hold its shape just long enough to glimpse the truth behind the names lost to moss and rain. Somewhere, you suspect the old queens lean closer too, braids heavy with charms, listening for who dares speak their half-remembered stories into the hush again. Historians will keep arguing, was this burial warrior or wife? Were these braids the mark of priestesses or generals? Did the Romans inflate the threat for their own glory? Or did they stumble into forests darker than their dispatches ever dared admit? You run your thumb along the cracked spine of a book, feeling the weight of all these unanswered questions settle soft as dusk around your shoulders. So breathe with it. Let the puzzle remain unfinished for tonight, an open door that whispers you back through the wild thickets, back through mist and bog, and roundhouse smoke back to where the hidden matriarchs stand quiet in the shadows of your dreams. Half queen, half myth, always waiting to be found again. Slip out of the archives now and step quietly into the waking world, where ancient echoes ripple through modern hedgerows and crooked lanes. Here, in the hum of sleepy villages and the twist of old place names, Britain's forgotten tribal queens linger in ways most never notice, tucked inside syllables, spoken without thought, woven into local tales, half told over pub counters and dusk-lit fields. Take a map and trace it with your fingertip. Cardimandua's old stronghold becomes a market town, with a name that still hints at a hill once ringed with sharpened stakes. A valley in Wales wears a name that translates, if you squint at the oldest dialect, into the Queen's Hollow. A crumbling stone circle near a farm carries whispers of a matriarch who watched the stars for signs of invasion long before Romans called her land Britannia. Historians shrug at these connections. Some insist they're folk etymology, villagers spinning fables to make a ditch or mound feel older, grander, more alive. Others argue that in a place so old and thick with overlapping tongues, Brythonic Latin, Saxon Norse, every syllable carries a ghost, however faded. Some scholars remain amused by the stubbornness of local memory, how a hedge or an oddly shaped hill might cradle a legend no empire could pave over entirely. In tiny parish churches, you might find carvings, barely visible faces, worn by centuries of damp air, half smiles that the village vicar will say are saints. but that grandmothers swear are the old queens peeking through the new stone. A quirky local custom in Northumbria once had young girls weaving charms of hawthorn and hair on Midsummer's Eve, whispering prayers to a lady of the woods who would guard their houses from gossip and bad harvests. Some say that lady was just the Virgin Mary in country disguise. Others nod toward a matriarch whose name faded from scrolls but clung stubbornly to hedgerow chants. Walk through these villages at dusk and listen for the hush. An old man leaning on his gate might tell you how his grandfather claimed to see a ghostly chariot wheel rut in the barley field behind the pub, or how his mother once tied charms into her braid because it was done that way when the old queens rode. He'll laugh it off before your next pint, but the hush in his pause says the tale still hums under his breath. Modern maps carry these fragments, like dried flowers pressed between pages delicate brittle, but they're all the same. Sometimes, a local historian will try to stitch them back together, publishing a slim pamphlet about how the shape of a hill matches a half-lost ballad. The townsfolk nod-smile politely and return to their errands, yet some part of them stands a little straighter when they pass that mound at twilight. One curious thing about these echoes is how they appear when you least expect them, a roadside sign hinting at a queen's ford, a field name that translates to shielded place, a children's rhyme that makes no sense until you remember that once women here tied iron charms to their skirts before riding out to barter peace or plan revolt. You stand in the middle of this hush, now a footpath at your back, a line of dry stone wall stretching away under gathering stars. Somewhere nearby, a rusted brooch still sleeps under damp soil. A blade fragment curls beside a lost burial mound no one's found yet. You inhale the quiet and feel how these queens never truly left. They drift like pollen catching in the throat of any story brave enough to breathe their names again. And maybe that's the soft promise these modern echoes carry, that power once rooted deep enough never fully dies. It grows quiet, slips sideways into moss and syllable hides in the lull between one generation's gossip and the next's bedtime tale. And when the world grows loud again, when roads crack and new empires boast, you can always find it tucked under a place name whispered in a field, humming under your feet, if you stand still long enough to listen. Breathe out now, deeper than before, as you drift through the final hush, where history loosens its grip and slips into dream. This is your soft goodbye, a last glance over your shoulder at the fierce women who gathered secrets like kindling, whose names flicker like candle smoke in the corners of your thoughts tonight. Picture them not as ghosts or statues, but as shadows stitched into hedgerows and bogs, their stories pressed flat under centuries of wet soil, yet somehow still restless. Imagine one last glimpse. A braid, heavy with bone charms, swings as a queen kneels by a hearth, stirring a stew that fed hungry warriors long after Roman coins lost their shine. Or see her riding a chariot that rattles over damp fields at dawn, wheels cutting lines that no empire's map could erase. Some scholars keep hunting for final proof, one more relic, a scrap of dispatch, a name spelled true on a tablet. Yet the fiercest truth might be the quietest one, that not everything powerful survives in ink and stone. Some power prefers the hush, drifting through folk songs, sung under breath, woven into the bend of an old road that once traced the edge of a roundhouse wall. A quirky belief lingers in border villages. If you whisper your worries to the earth above a queen's forgotten mound, she'll take them for the night, holding your secrets tight among the roots and bones until morning softens them to dust. Children still slip away at dusk, feet bare braids tangled to press an ear to the damp soil, half hoping for a heartbeat older than roads and scrolls. Tonight, you stand there too, one last hush, pressed warm around your shoulders. You feel the hush of old bargains struck beside smoky fires, the hush of chariot wheels swallowed by mossy lanes, the hush of burial mounds breathing secrets into cold dawns that Rome never tamed. Somewhere under your feet, rusted sword hilts cradle the bones of queens who spoke power softly, yet carried it like iron, hidden in a cloak hem. Each charm buried with them hums with the promise that nothing truly fierce ever fades completely. It just burrows deeper, waiting for someone half awake to lean close enough to listen. The empire they resisted cracked and fell. Roads turned to bramble villas to rubble and dispatches to dust. Yet these women linger at the edge of maps curled up in syllables locals mumble without knowing why. Their legends slip through school books and bedtime stories, half-named matriarchs who remind you that the hush can hold an empire's worth of strength if you know where to stand still and hear it breathe. So let them keep watch tonight as you drift. Let their quiet crowns and secret counsels settle soft around your ribs. If a braid charm rattles in your dreams, don't flinch. See it instead as a promise that tomorrow's noise will never quite drown out the hush these queens left behind for you to find again. And if you ever wake at dawn to the wind rattling your window, listen a moment longer. Maybe that hush is only the breeze, or maybe it's a hidden matriarch reminding you that even the softest secrets can ride out storms and roads and empires if you let them. Now exhale, rest easy. The mounds stand watch the braid charms, sleep the spears, rust, and the hush hums on quiet waiting yours. Let your breath slow now as you drift further from this hidden Britain, this hush of tribal queens and forest secrets. Picture the soft weight of moss under your palms, the way ancient wheels cut tracks that still hum in barley fields at dusk. Every restless thought tonight can settle into that earth roots, reaching deeper than empire stones, deeper than any line inked on parchment. Let your mind drift there to roundhouses warm with quiet power, to braids heavy with charms, to a night sky that never once bent to a conqueror's road. If sleep comes softly, let it carry you like a hidden path through oak groves and misty lanes, where forgotten matriarchs still watch over your dreams. If you wake before dawn, remember you're never far from their hush. Just close your eyes again. Listen for the faint rattle of braid charms on a wind only you can hear. And if this story soothed you tonight, you can always wander back. I'll be here with another quiet piece of history when you're ready to rest your eyes once more. Sweet dreams. Traveler, may hidden queens guard your sleep.